The 15-minute legend, how one pilot saved an aircraft carrier against all odds. October 26, 1942. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. The Pacific War was raging, and the United States Navy found itself in a desperate situation. Two aircraft carriers, the USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, were all that stood between Japan's advancing forces and America's vulnerable supply lines. What happened that day would become one of the most extraordinary feats of aerial combat in military history, all thanks to one man, Lieutenant Stanley Swede Vejtasa. In the early morning hours, radar operators aboard the Enterprise detected incoming Japanese aircraft. The alarm sounded, and pilots scrambled to their planes. Among them was Vejtasa, a 27-year-old South Dakota native who had already proven himself a capable pilot earlier that year at the Battle of the Coral Sea. But what awaited him on this October morning would test the limits of human courage and skill. Vejtasa had been assigned to lead a small group of F-4F Wildcat fighters, part of the Grim Reaper's squadron. As they took off from the Enterprise's deck, they were immediately at a disadvantage. They were launching late, too low in altitude, and severely outnumbered by the incoming Japanese attack force. The odds were stacked against them from the start. As they climbed to intercept, Vejtasa spotted the first wave of Japanese aircraft, over 20 Val dive bombers heading straight for the American carriers. His Wildcats were still climbing, trying desperately to gain the altitude advantage that could mean the difference between victory and defeat. But they were too late. The Japanese bombers began their attack runs on the USS Hornet. Bombs rained down on the Hornet, setting her flight deck ablaze. Vejtasa watched in horror as the ship that had launched the famous Doolittle raid just months earlier was being torn apart. But rather than freezing or panicking, Vejtasa made a decision that would change the course of the battle. He ordered his squadron to engage the Japanese aircraft, even though they were at a tactical disadvantage. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Vejtasa maneuvered his Wildcat with incredible precision, targeting the Japanese bombers one after another. His first victim was a Val dive bomber that had just released its payload on the Hornet. Vejtasa closed in, his 650 caliber machine guns blazing, and the enemy aircraft spiraled into the ocean in a trail of smoke. But he was just getting started. As more Japanese aircraft swarmed around the American carriers, Vejtasa became a one-man defensive force. He shot down a second Val bomber, then a third. His fellow pilots were engaged in their own desperate battles, but Vejtasa seemed to be everywhere at once, his Wildcat dancing through the sky with deadly precision. The Japanese weren't just sending dive bombers, though. A group of Kate torpedo bombers appeared, skimming low over the water toward the Enterprise. These aircraft posed an even greater threat. A well-placed torpedo could sink a carrier faster than bombs from above. Vejtasa spotted them and immediately dove to intercept. In a daring maneuver that defied conventional aerial tactics, he attacked the torpedo bombers head-on. This was considered suicidal. The opposing aircraft would be firing directly at each other, and the closing speed left almost no time to aim. But Vejtasa's timing was impeccable. He shot down one Kate, then another, his bullets finding their mark with uncanny accuracy. By this point, Vejtasa had shot down 5 enemy aircraft in a matter of minutes, an incredible achievement that would qualify him as an ace in a day, a rare distinction in naval aviation. But the battle wasn't over, and the Enterprise was still in danger. As Vejtasa continued to engage the enemy, he spotted a particularly determined Kate torpedo bomber that had broken through the American defenses and was lining up for an attack run on the Enterprise. This was the moment of truth. If that torpedo struck home, the last operational American carrier in the Pacific might be lost. Vejtasa was running low on ammunition after his earlier engagements. Some accounts suggest he was completely out, but rather than breaking off, he made an astonishing decision. He aimed his Wildcat directly at the enemy bomber, essentially turning his aircraft into a missile. It was a calculated risk. If the Japanese pilot didn't flinch, both aircraft would be destroyed in the collision. But the Japanese pilot, faced with this unexpected and terrifying counterattack, lost his nerve. He broke off his torpedo run and tried to escape. Vejtasa, seizing the advantage, managed to maneuver into firing position and shot down the Cape before it could regroup for another attack. It was his sixth kill of the day. As if that weren't enough, Vejtasa spotted yet another Japanese aircraft threatening the Enterprise. Despite his depleted ammunition and the strain of continuous combat, he engaged and destroyed this seventh enemy plane, cementing his place in aviation history. When Vejtasa finally landed his Wildcat back on the Enterprise's deck, he had accomplished something extraordinary. 7 confirmed kills in a single engagement, saving his carrier from certain destruction and earning himself the title of Ace in a Day. His fuel tanks were nearly empty, his aircraft riddled with bullet holes, but he had survived against impossible odds. The Battle of Santa Cruz Islands was technically a tactical victory for the Japanese. The USS Hornet was lost, and the Enterprise was damaged. But thanks to pilots like Vejtasa, the Enterprise survived to fight another day. And just 1 year later, she would play a crucial role in the American victory at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, helping to turn the tide of the Pacific War. Vejtasa's 15 minutes of incredible courage didn't go unrecognized. He was awarded the Navy Cross, one of the highest decorations for valor in combat. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism and superb airmanship. But perhaps the greatest testament to his achievement was the fact that the Enterprise, nicknamed the Big E, survived the war, despite being the most heavily damaged U.S. aircraft carrier to remain operational during the conflict. What makes Vejtasa's story even more remarkable is that this wasn't his first extraordinary feat of aerial combat. 5 months earlier, at the Battle of the Coral Sea, he had achieved the nearly impossible by shooting down 3 Japanese Zero fighters while flying a slow, vulnerable SBD Dauntless dive bomber, an aircraft not designed for air-to-air combat. That earlier action had earned him his first Navy Cross and a reputation as one of the most skilled pilots in the fleet. After the war, Vejtasa continued his naval career, eventually rising to the rank of captain and commanding the aircraft carrier USS Constellation. He retired in 1970 after 33 years of service. Throughout his life, he remained modest about his achievements, rarely discussing his moment of glory unless pressed. When asked about that day at Santa Cruz, he would often deflect, saying simply that he was just doing his job. Stanley Vejtasa passed away in 2013 at the age of 98, one of the last surviving naval aces of World War II. His legacy lives on not just in military history books, but in the very existence of the United States as a Pacific power. Had the Enterprise been lost that day, the course of the war might have been dramatically different. The story of Vejtasa's 15 minutes of legendary combat reminds us that history often hinges on the actions of individuals in moments of crisis. When faced with overwhelming odds, one person's courage, skill, and determination can change the course of events in ways that echo through time. It's also worth noting that Vejtasa's heritage played a role in his nickname. Though called Swede, he was actually of Czechoslovakian descent. The nickname was typical of the era, when ethnic distinctions were often blurred or misapplied. But regardless of his background, Vejtasa embodied the American fighting spirit, a combination of technical skill, tactical innovation, and sheer guts that would eventually help win the war. Military historians and aviation experts still study Vejtasa's actions at Santa Cruz as a masterclass in fighter tactics. His ability to maintain situational awareness in the chaos of combat, to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure, and to push both himself and his aircraft to the absolute limit represent the pinnacle of combat flying. What's particularly notable about Vejtasa's achievement is that he was flying an F-4F Wildcat, an aircraft that was generally outperformed by its Japanese counterpart, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero. The Zero could climb faster, turn tighter, and had greater range. But Vejtasa understood the Wildcat's strengths, its ruggedness, diving speed, and powerful armament, and used them to devastating effect. In those 15 minutes of combat, Vejtasa didn't just save a carrier. He demonstrated that American pilots could overcome technical disadvantages through superior tactics and sheer determination. This lesson would prove invaluable as the war progressed and newer American fighters like the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair entered service. The Battle of Santa Cruz Islands marked a turning point in the Pacific War. Though the Japanese could claim a tactical victory, they lost many irreplaceable veteran pilots, a resource they could not easily replenish. The Americans, meanwhile, learned valuable lessons that would inform their strategy going forward. And at the center of this pivotal engagement was one pilot who refused to accept defeat. Stanley Swede Vejtasa's 15 minutes of legendary combat serve as a reminder that in the most desperate circumstances, individual courage can make all the difference. His story is not just about aerial skill or military tactics. It's about the human capacity to rise to extraordinary challenges when everything is on the line. In the annals of naval aviation, few stories match the sheer drama and significance of Vejtasa's stand against overwhelming odds. In just 15 minutes, he wrote his name into history and helped ensure that America would ultimately prevail in the Pacific. It's a testament to the fact that legends aren't always made over lifetimes. Sometimes they're forged in mere minutes when ordinary people do extraordinary things. As we look back on that October day in 1942, we're reminded that history is shaped not just by grand strategies and technological advantages, but by the courage and skill of individuals who, when faced with impossible situations, simply refused to fail. Stanley Swede Vejtasa was such an individual, and his 15 minutes of legendary combat continue to inspire and amaze more than 8 decades later.